Let me start with water diplomacy, and in that context with relations between states, so really international relations over water. Water diplomacy is an approach, or is the tool that countries, but also international organizations and other actors use in order to ensure that countries that might be in competition over water, you mentioned Egypt and Ethiopia over the Nile, for example, that those engage in peaceful conflict resolution or even in conflict prevention instead of engaging in conflict or even violence. And we see that, I mean, we see the conflicts around the world. You mentioned some, you could add to those also Afghanistan, Iran, for example. You could add the Mekong, even the lower Mekong without China. There have been conflicts between Laos building dams and Vietnam and Cambodia downstream. So we have these competitive situations, but if we look at the transboundary watercourses around the world, there are more than 310. In most of them, we actually see much more cooperation, right? Think about the Rhine, the Danube, the Great Lakes between the US and Canada, the Okavango River in Southern Africa, and many, many more. And why is that the case? It's because water diplomacy is employed, and water diplomacy is being employed because countries have acknowledged that engaging in conflict with the neighboring state has too many negative effects, has too many costs on their bilateral or regional relations, on trade relations, on cultural exchange, economic exchange, financial exchange, whatever it might be that links them. So water diplomacy is a tool employed by water, but also by foreign policymakers in order to ensure that this, even if there are tension, that they're contained in a way that allows them to peacefully settle their disputes. And that at the transboundary, at the international level, typically works, right? Even you mentioned Ethiopia and Egypt. Yes, it escalated to an extent that it has not in other basins, but still we haven't seen war. That is quite different, though, if we look at the more local subnational level, where we do see conflicts. I mentioned the ones between farmers and herders in Mali before, but we see similar conflicts in the Horn of Africa. We've seen tensions, conflicts, violent protests over water in Iran and in Iraq and other places. And there we indeed see more violence than at the interstate level. Of course, not only because of water, but also because of a lack of effective governance mechanisms, effective dispute resolution mechanisms, sometimes even the entire absence of a state. Think of large areas of the Sahel where the state, the government is practically not present and has had to leave large areas to these illicit terrorist, whatever you want to call them, groups. And then there is no means available, similar to water diplomacy at the international level, that would help the different water users to address their conflicts peacefully. And that's where we then see occasional violence, still keeping in mind that overall worldwide, we do see much, much more cooperation than conflict at all levels, from the individual, interpersonal, communal, all the way to the international, simply because we're so linked to each other through the water that we share, that in most cases, it forces us to cooperate. And that's then, again, water diplomacy.